ISATs from last year and modifying them. In K7, we're totally redesigning them because we're not going to be using any sort of curriculum this year. So I'm going to give you like a little snippet or a little intro to each ISAT in a second, but basically here are the like hallmarks of this year's ISATs. The standards were identified by our district partners. We've already talked about that. The assessments are generated from other quality assessments. So we, in the case of K through 7 math, have taken assessment items straight from the Arizona State test and aligned tests to create them. The objectives are aligned to the assessment questions, and I'm going to show you at what level we're getting to on this, which I'm really excited about. So unit plans are comprised of scaffolded objectives, and there are author's notes. So in the example, the way that, for example, we're teaching plot development in like 4th through 6th grade teaches climax before rising and falling action. Why? We gave some author's notes to explain like why that's maybe the more helpful way to scaffold those objectives as an example there. We will have serious feedback loops for edits and revisions, and also the ISAT will be online for in-the-moment adjustments. So hopefully what will happen is that when staff engages with it the first time before week 0, they'll be able to send me feedback about, this was really unclear to me, can you add an author's note there? This objective seems like I would rewrite it this way, do you agree, we can change it, that sort of stuff. So let's just look at, literally this is like, I'm going to highlight the important parts of what we've been doing with ISATs. Just to give you some context, this ISAT has been written by Casey Boyke, who's been a CS, I think 4 times, who's written ISATs and student achievement toolkits in the region. Her feedback this year is that she has never written an ISAT that we have been so specific about alignment. So if you'll notice here, like this is sort of the example I was highlighting before. Her objective was students will be able to write an equation to show multiplication as equal sets, but actually they just have to identify it on the assessment. So like the level of specificity that we're going back and saying, actually should this be identify? And if it is identify, does that still align to the performance on, like, is that on level? Yes or no? If it's not, then we need to redesign the assessment. If it is, then we need to realign the objective.
So in some cases, we'll end up with an assessment that is more aligned to the standard than the standardized test that the state uses, right?
Yes, yes. The second thing we're looking at is the level of the actual objective. So I think I could give 2 examples here, but this is a pretty good one. So basically, like, pretend that's not there. This was the original objective. Students will be able to subtract fractions with like denominators. So what we added to this was 2 things in a given context. So that means like if I'm a core member and I'm looking at this objective, I know that actually when I teach this, I should teach this within the context of a word problem because that's how it's assessed and that's a higher level of rigor. And in addition, kids don't need to simplify. So like giving core members these sort of cues that are like in a given context, no simplification, or in other ways like with you know, like adding money up to, like in what parameters, up to $1,000, up to $100. So giving core members cues that indicate like the level of the standard, the level of the objective, and how it will be assessed. Does that make sense? So like this is the level of specificity to which we're looking at ISATs to make sure that that core members can really use these. So the way they'll use this is they're going to look at the assessment item to start building their vision for their lesson, to start building their key points, driving from the objective. So to make sure there's no inconsistencies between the two, because that's so foundational in their planning that we don't want them to get tripped up and like, but this is not aligned. It will be.
Okay, I just want to clarify what Brian said because I want to make sure I understand right. It actually won't be more aligned than Ames, but you took Ames to make sure that that's what the standard meant.
Yes,
so like,
yes.
So that's what, so like, it's not going to be different, it's just that like sometimes the standard says something that's different from what they actually ask on Ames. And so you went back to like...
So we just made sure that the objective and the assessment aligned in such a way, and really we went back to the standard to check to make sure we weren't, we were still hitting the level of rigor of the performance objective or the state standard. And making sure we weren't like lowering the level of rigor in order to compensate for the assessment question. John?
Okay, along those same questions. The last slide, it showed that what you were doing is you were making sure that the question matched the standard, right? So it seems like what happened in this slide was different from what happened in the next slide. Here it seems like what you said was that you were aligning to the standard, because you were taking a look to make sure, does it actually mean right or does it actually mean identify, and then if we need to change the question, if it's right, it's going to be open-ended question.
Correct.
And there are open-ended questions on the...
Yes.
Okay. And then the next one, on the next slide, it seemed like what you'd done... yeah, could you jump to it just so I remember? it seems like what you're trying to do is, you said you changed the standard to match the question. Does that make sense? You said we didn't do the in a given context. We added that because we saw the question was in a contextual situation.
So they changed the
Objective.
not the standard.
We just added more context to the actual objective in the ISAT.
Okay.
And I kind of think of this as
So the standard did say contextual situation.
The standard didn't specify.
Oh. Okay.
We're just adding that for core member context. So
Okay.
we don't see, essentially what I would not want to see, if I didn't have this, it could be subtract fractions with like denominators. I could see a core member lesson level assessment that had like 7/8 minus 2/8. This is like a very like just rudimentary assessment. Whereas what I really want to see is questions like this on their lesson level assessment.
Okay.
And I just think the thing that I told Michelle that is so wonderful about this is we have seen core members really struggle with knowing the appropriate level of rigor for the grade that they're teaching, and I think adding this level of detail into the objective about what actually we're asking them to do is going to be so helpful for core members in their lesson planning process and really understanding, well, what should I be teaching for third graders in this objective versus what I should be teaching to fifth graders in this objective.
Yeah. Kelly?
And I just want to say that the design team has also taken on really redesigning the core member learning sessions around this and the staff training sessions around this, so that because part of this is also once core members get this objective, they need to know to look. So like this helps give them some context, but the core member learning and staff training sessions this year are going to be much clearer. That then the next step is core members take this objective, they have to look at this assessment in order to really understand, to know what in a given context means, like what is that context, and make sure that that's a clear step in the planning process when they're planning their lesson plans.
So I asked, did you want to give any more, like I asked Jermaine to say, like, having worked with the ISAT so closely last year as a CMAP, like why, like what are your reflections about this and why is it hopefully exciting for the 09 Phoenix Institute?
Yeah, no, it is really exciting, really for the reasons, and I want to echo what Crystal said. No, just the same thing, because it is really aligned, because it does help them determine the level of rigor, because it does provide the initial context so that when they get to, like Kelby said, looking at the assessment to really clarify, it's more of a confirmation than, oh, I'm figuring it out now when I look at the assessment. But I was confused initially by the objective, or the reverse. It's just lines up so perfectly. It's just beautiful.
Let's talk a little bit about literacy. The only thing I'm going to highlight here is that for our K-7 reading ISATs, we use the DRA as our primary assessment tool. And for those of you that are less familiar with that language, it's the developmental reading assessment. It is a reading growth assessment. So essentially what it measures is like, I'm a kid who can read a book that's on a mid-third grade level. I need some extra instruction on it. By the end of Institute, we want them to read that same level book, but independently, so they don't need extra support. Like, that's the goal for reading growth. The hard part about that is that we have to then teach reading objectives. And the message this year, and we're going to get into a lot more of what this actually means, is that we're going to diagnose the child on their instructional level. We want to get them to their independent level, and the daily objectives that they will learn, while sometimes are not like one-to-one correlated with the DRA, do serve as a proxy for, like, if kids are mastering every objective we're teaching, they will do better on the DRA. So this is just an example of how we're going to show core members that alignment. So basically this is week 1's objectives for the 6th grade ISAT. I think we've modified these a little bit, so I wouldn't pick apart the objectives. But basically the takeaway here is, like, we're basically saying there is a week of objectives that in this way aligns to the DRA.